I am Grace Monroe, and this is my story. My earliest memories are not of toys or playgrounds, but of marble floors and tall windows that looked out over the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill in Boston, Massachusetts. The house was white brick with green shutters, a place that seemed to hold its breath in history. My mother, Margaret, used to say that a house is not just walls and a roof. It is a promise. She bought it the year her company, Monroe Atlas, crossed its first $5 million in revenue, and she told me she wanted me to grow up inside something that symbolized strength and permanence. "If I build this right," she once whispered to me as we decorated the dining room with gold curtains, "it will last longer than I do." I was too young to understand, but those words never left me. When I walk through those rooms now, I still feel her presence. Her perfume lingers faintly in the corners, and her careful taste in art hangs on every wall. Even the oak banister feels like her hand guiding me up the stairs. But the truth is, the house became both my safe place and my burden after she died. She left me not only her memory, but also her greatest treasure, her company. With a steady hand and sharp instinct, she had built Monroe Atlas from a single rented office in downtown Boston into a multi-state enterprise that was valued at nearly $400 million. Before she passed, she transferred 56% of the shares into my name. That decision changed everything: my life, my father's plans, and even the fate of our family. Her lawyer, Olivia Reyes, was a firm and steady woman who seemed made of both compassion and steel. I remember sitting in her office, a space filled with leather chairs and heavy law books, while she read aloud my mother's will. Olivia explained that the majority shares were now mine, secured in trust with full rights the moment I turned 25. My father, Richard Monroe, had expected those shares to land in his hands. When he learned the truth, his face turned the color of old brick. My mother had looked him straight in the eye, days before her last breath, and said, "You love power more than truth, Richard. And that is why you cannot be trusted with this company." She had meant every word. At the time, I wanted to believe my mother was exaggerating. After all, fathers are supposed to be protectors, not predators. Yet the truth revealed itself slowly, like cracks in a porcelain vase. My father's smile never reached his eyes when he looked at me. His questions were always about stock prices, market strategies, or how I planned to use my voting power, not about whether I was eating well or if I felt safe in the big house without my mother. He lived in New York City, in a penthouse near Central Park, and though he often called to check in, those calls felt more like business inquiries than family conversations. Then one night, I learned just how deep his hunger for control ran. I had traveled to New York to attend a board dinner, and I stayed in our old townhouse for the night. The walls there were thin, and as I walked down the hallway past my father's study, I heard his voice. He was speaking in low tones to his friend, William Cross, a man who had been part of his circle for decades. I paused, curious, but when I caught the words, my stomach turned cold. "She's in a way," my father said. "Grace doesn't understand the magnitude of what we could do if we controlled all the shares. With 56% in her name, she's a wall between me and the board. If those shares were freed, if they were mine, I could close the deal, sell the company, and walk away with at least $400 million in liquid assets." William's voice was cautious. "But she's your daughter, Richard. She's my obstacle," my father hissed. "And obstacles can be removed." The words sliced through me. For a moment, I could not breathe. I pressed my back against the cool plaster wall, feeling the weight of every syllable. Removed. Was that what I was to him? Not his child, not his legacy, just a barrier to wealth? My mind raced, my heart pounded, but my instincts took over. I slid my phone from my pocket, hit record, and captured a piece of their conversation. It wasn't the whole plot, but it was enough to show his intent, enough to warn me that the danger wasn't in my imagination. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling of the guest bedroom, hearing my mother's voice echo in my memory. "He loves power more than truth. Be careful, Grace." The truth I had avoided was now undeniable. My father wanted me gone. Not just ignored or bypassed, but gone. The next morning, I left before he woke and boarded a train back to Boston. I sat by the window, watching the gray landscape rush past, and tried to steady myself. Fear is a strange thing. It can paralyze you, or it can sharpen you. For me, it sharpened everything. Every detail seemed brighter. The clatter of the train wheels, the faint coffee smell from the cafe car, the soft weight of my phone in my hand. I knew I had to protect myself, but I also knew I couldn't fight him alone. The first person I told was Olivia. I met her in her office, slid my phone across the desk, and played the recording. She listened in silence, her jaw tightening. When it ended, she leaned back and folded her arms. "Grace," she said, "this is enough to show motive, but not enough to convict him of anything. Still, it's a start. You must be cautious from now on." The second person I confided in was my best friend, Nora Bennett. We had met in college, both of us studying economics, though Nora's interest had always been in the people behind the numbers. Where I was cautious and deliberate, she was quick and daring. I called her that evening and told her everything. She didn't gasp or panic. She simply said, "Then we'll make a plan." Those words steadied me more than she could know. For weeks after, I lived with one foot in normal life and the other in quiet preparation. I went to board meetings, smiled at acquaintances, and signed documents, but underneath it all, I was calculating. My father was plotting, and so was I. He thought he was clever, whispering his schemes in locked rooms, but he had underestimated me. He had forgotten I was Margaret Monroe's daughter, the woman who built a fortune from nothing and left it not to him, but to me, because she believed I would protect it. I learned then that trust is fragile. A house can stand tall for 100 years, and a company can grow into a giant, but the foundation of a family can crumble in a single sentence. As I sat at my mother's oak desk in the Beacon Hill house, with the city lights glowing beyond the window, I realized I was no longer a girl waiting for her father's approval. I was a woman who carried the weight of 56% of a company, a house filled with memories, and a secret recording that could change everything. And in that moment, as the night deepened around me, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." 2 weeks after I overheard my father plotting against me, the invitation came. He called late in the evening, his voice smooth and warm, as if he were just a caring parent who wanted to spend time with his daughter. "Grace," he said, "we should travel together to the company's celebration in Manhattan. People need to see us side by side, united. Your mother's legacy deserves at least that." The words tasted false even as he spoke them, but I did not let my suspicion show. "Of course, father," I replied softly, matching his tone. My heart raced, but my voice stayed calm. I knew this was the moment I had been preparing for. That night, I opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed in the Beacon Hill house and pulled out the slim parachute I had ordered weeks earlier. It had cost me $2,600, every penny justified. I tested the harness once more, running my fingers over the stitching, making sure the release cord slid cleanly. My mother's portrait watched me from the hallway, her painted eyes calm and steady, as if urging me on. I whispered to her, "I'm ready, Mom. I'll survive this." The next morning, I dressed carefully, a tailored navy jacket, a silk blouse, and dark trousers. Beneath the layers, I wore the parachute harness, thin enough not to show. I packed a tote bag with a second outfit, my phone charger, a few bills folded in an envelope, $520s, and the forged company badge Nora had arranged for me. Everything was in place. Olivia called as I waited for the car that would take me to the private airstrip. Her voice was steady, as always. "Grace, if anything feels wrong, trust yourself. Don't hesitate. You've already done the hard part. Now it's just timing." "I know," I whispered. "I'll call you when I land. My way." The car rolled through the streets of Boston and out toward the coast. At the small private terminal, my father's jet gleamed in the sunlight. It was a sleek silver bird with black trim, polished to perfection. My father stood at the foot of the stairs, smiling broadly. His hair was immaculate, his suit perfectly tailored, but his eyes, those eyes gave him away. They were cold, watchful, hungry. "Grace," he said, arms spread as though he longed for an embrace. I gave him only a polite nod. He didn't notice. He was already turning to lead me up the steps. Inside, the cabin smelled of leather and expensive scotch. I took a seat by the window. My father sat across from me, sipping from a crystal glass even before we had taken off. The engines roared, and the plane lifted into the sky, leaving Boston behind. For a while, he made small talk about the company's new contracts, about investors in Europe, about how proud he was that we were traveling together. But beneath every word was a tension, a rehearsed edge, like an actor delivering lines. Then, somewhere above the coast of Connecticut, he stood. He adjusted his cufflinks, set down his drink, and walked toward the cabin door. His smile curved into something sharp. "You know, Grace," he said, almost casually, "you always loved your mother's dreams more than mine." The air pressure changed. I felt the cabin floor tilt slightly as he pulled the handle. The door cracked open, and a roar of wind filled the jet. My pulse thundered in my ears. He looked at me one last time, no love in his face, only greed. Then he shoved me. I fell into chaos. The roar swallowed me whole. Cold air slammed against my skin, and the earth spun beneath me in dizzying circles. For a heartbeat, fear froze me. I thought of my mother, of the house on Beacon Hill, of all the promises I had made. Then my training, my preparation, came rushing back. With trembling hands, I yanked the release cord. The chute burst open like a white flower against the sky. The violent fall slowed into a sway, the air catching me, holding me. My lungs filled again. I laughed and cried all at once, tears streaming back against the wind. Above me, the silver jet tilted and curved away, shrinking into the horizon. My father believed he had erased me, but he had no idea that I was still here, alive and defiant. I drifted downward, the world growing clearer. The green of trees, the sparkle of water, the long stretch of sand near Long Island. My feet touched down hard, stumbling onto the beach. The sand burned my palms as I fell to my knees, gasping. But I was alive. I rolled onto my back, staring at the sky, whispering, "I made it." A man walking his golden retriever came running toward me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in jogging clothes. His dog barked and wagged its tail as if greeting me back to life. "My God," he shouted. "You fell from the sky. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," I panted, pushing myself up. "Just, please, I need to get to Manhattan. Do you have a car?" His name was Evan, and without hesitation, he helped me gather the parachute and walked me to his Jeep parked near the dunes. I pulled the envelope from my tote and pressed $200 into his hand. "For gas, for the trouble," I insisted. He shook his head, pushing it back. "Keep your money. Just glad you're alive." But I left the bills on the seat anyway when I got out at a small train station nearby. My hands shook as I bought a ticket and boarded the train bound for Penn Station. The hum of the engine was a strange comfort. I found a corner seat, opened my phone, and texted Nora just 2 words. It worked. A moment later, her reply came. Phase 2. Hurry. On the train, I changed clothes in the tiny restroom, slipping into the fresh black dress from my tote. I pinned up my hair, wiped the sand from my skin, and slipped the company badge Nora had arranged onto a silver chain. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, but steady. I was not a victim. I was a survivor on her way to finish the plan. The city lights greeted me as dusk fell over Manhattan. By the time I stepped out of Penn Station, the streets buzzed with taxis, horns, and the chatter of strangers. I felt invisible in the crowd, yet purposeful. Every step carried me closer to the tower where Monroe Atlas was celebrating, closer to the stage where my father planned to lie, closer to the moment when truth would break open in front of everyone. I walked quickly, head high, as if nothing had happened, as if I had not fallen from the sky only hours before. Inside me, though, the memory of the wind, the roar, and the sudden bloom of the parachute lived like fire. My father thought he had silenced me, but he had only sharpened my resolve. By the time I arrived at the hotel where Nora had left my badge, I was calm again. I retrieved the envelope from the front desk, clipped the badge to my dress, and headed toward the venue. My father's jet would not land for another hour, and by then, I would already be waiting. Waiting, alive, ready to speak. The city glowed like a jewel that night. Manhattan at dusk always has a way of pretending it is eternal, as though its lights will never go out, as though its towers will never crumble. From the moment my train pulled into Penn Station and I stepped into the thick evening air, I knew this night would mark me forever. The people on the sidewalks hurried past, their laughter and arguments drifting up into the September air, but I carried a secret weight. I was not simply a guest heading to a celebration. I was a survivor carrying proof of my father's crime. The party was held in a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan, a monument of steel and crystal that seemed to slice into the night sky. Cars pulled up one after another, sleek black sedans with tinted windows. Doormen in dark coats held the glass doors open as guests stepped out, their dresses shimmering, their suits sharp. I adjusted the strap of my tote, held my badge against my chest, and walked inside. The lobby opened into a ballroom filled with golden light. Chandeliers hung high above, their crystals casting soft sparks across polished floors. A band played old rock tunes in the corner, their instruments echoing off the glass walls. Waiters wove through the crowd with trays of champagne, their silver serving platters flashing in the light. Everywhere I looked, people clinked glasses and whispered about contracts, mergers, and stock prices. Monroe Atlas was their world, their meal ticket, their pride, and tonight was supposed to be my father's victory parade. I spotted Olivia Reyes near the stage. She stood tall and calm, her dark hair swept back, her sharp eyes scanning the room. When she caught sight of me, a flicker of relief softened her expression, though she gave no outward sign to anyone else. She nodded once, a silent signal that everything was in place. Somewhere in the crowd, I knew Nora was watching too, ready to move if needed. I stayed near the back of the ballroom as the program began. The host, a board member named Charles Whitman, tapped the microphone and called for attention. He spoke about Monroe Atlas's success, about growth, about how proud Margaret Monroe would have been. His voice caught slightly when he mentioned her name, and for a moment, I thought the night might still hold dignity. But then, the doors at the far end opened, and my father walked in. Richard Monroe looked the part of the grieving widower and proud executive. He wore a tailored black suit, his tie perfectly knotted, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. He held a glass of champagne in one hand, and when he raised it, his face twisted into a performance of sorrow. "Terrible news," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Grace, my dear daughter, has suffered a tragic accident. She fell from my plane earlier today. I cannot explain my grief." A murmur spread through the crowd. Some gasped, some shook their heads. A few covered their mouths in shock. My father let the silence deepen before lowering his head, as though the weight of his false grief might crush him. And then his eyes lifted and found me. For a moment, everything froze. His hand shook, and the glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Champagne spread across the tiles like spilled truth. A hush fell over the entire room. Dozens of eyes turned from him to me. I stood tall, my chin raised, my heart hammering like a drum inside my chest. I walked slowly, deliberately, toward the stage. Every step echoed. Every breath seemed to carry across the crowd. I climbed the steps, took the microphone from Charles Whitman's trembling hand, and faced them all. "I am alive," I said, my voice steady though my body trembled. "And I know what he tried to do." A gasp swept through the ballroom like a wave. My father's face drained of color, but I did not look at him. Instead, I reached into my tote and pulled out my phone. I pressed play. The recording filled the room. My father's voice, low and venomous, telling William Cross that I stood in his way, that obstacles can be removed, that $400 million waited if only I were gone. Whispers erupted. Some people stared at their shoes, ashamed. Others shook their heads in disbelief. A few nodded, as though they had always suspected. But I was not finished. I pulled out the harness from my bag, thin and black, the same parachute straps that had saved my life. I showed them photographs on the screen, me standing on the sandy strip near Long Island, the parachute crumpled beside me. I held up my train receipt, stamped with the time proving I had arrived in Manhattan long before his plane landed. Every detail was evidence, and every piece burned through his lies. My mother gave me 56% of this company, I said, my voice rising. Not because of blood, not because of birth, but because she believed in honest work and clear books. My father wanted it all, not to build, but to sell, to strip away, to take the dollars he did not earn. And when I stood in his way, he tried to kill me. The silence broke into a storm of voices. Some board members protested, some shouted questions, some simply stood frozen. But through the noise, I saw the truth. No one rushed to defend him. No one believed his mask anymore. That was when the doors opened again, this time not for guests but for police. Officer James Miller and Officer Rosa Clark, both in uniform, stepped inside with two more behind them. Their presence cut through the chaos like a blade. Olivia stepped forward, calm and professional, handing over a folder thick with evidence. The recording, the texts I had sent her, the flight logs, the purchase receipt for the parachute. The officers approached my father. Officer Clark read him his rights in a clear, firm voice. The band in the corner had stopped playing long ago, their instruments silent. My father stood there, his tie crooked now, his face stripped of its charm. For once, he said nothing. No excuses, no speeches, no lies. The mask had cracked, and what remained was simply a man caught in his own greed. As they led him away in handcuffs, the room seemed to exhale. Some guests still whispered, others stared openly, but I no longer cared. I had done what I came to do. I had exposed him, humiliated him, and survived him. I stepped down from the stage, my legs trembling but my spirit unbroken. Olivia caught my arm gently and whispered, "It's over." But I knew it was not truly over. My father's arrest was only the beginning. The real work, protecting my mother's legacy, restoring the company's honor, rebuilding trust, was still ahead. Yet in that golden room, under the glass and light of Manhattan, I stood taller than I ever had before. I was not the girl my father had tried to erase. I was the woman who had refused to fall. The morning after the party, I returned to Boston on the first train. As the city gave way to suburbs and then to fields, I leaned against the window and let the rhythm of the tracks steady me. My clothes still carried the faint scent of champagne and fear. My phone buzzed with messages from reporters, board members, even distant acquaintances who had already heard the news. I silenced it. For now, I needed quiet. When I finally walked up the familiar hill of Beacon Hill, the white brick house stood waiting for me. Morning sunlight painted its walls in gold, and for the first time since my mother's death, I felt it embrace me. The door creaked the same way it always had, and the scent of old oak and lavender polish filled the hallway. It was as if my mother had opened her arms to me. I touched the banister she once held and whispered, "I'm safe." I made it. In the kitchen, Nora Bennett was already waiting, a pot of coffee brewing. She had stayed the night after helping me plan everything, and now she leaned against the counter, her hair in a loose knot, her eyes sharp with both relief and pride. "You did it," she said simply. I sat at the table, and soon Olivia Reyes arrived, her briefcase in hand. The three of us gathered around the long oak table my mother had bought at auction years ago. We spread out papers, the emergency board resolution, the evidence packets, and the voting tallies. It was all official now. Richard Monroe was stripped of his role, removed from the board, and the majority recognized my control. They named me interim chair until the next election. "I don't want this company to rot from the inside," I told them, my voice firm. "If I'm going to lead, even temporarily, then we start by protecting the people who built it." And so we made decisions that morning. We voted to raise the pay floor by $3 an hour, making sure the staff who worked tirelessly every day felt the change in their paychecks. We created a plan to audit the books, to wipe away the shadows my father had left in the ledgers. Most importantly, We committed $1 million to a new grant fund for women founders across America, a way to honor my mother's vision of lifting others, not crushing them. By noon, Nora slid a mug of coffee toward me and said, "You're rebuilding an empire, Grace. And this time, it will belong to the right hands." When the house grew quiet again, I wandered into the garden. My mother had loved her roses, planting them in neat rows with little copper labels. Some had withered, but others still bloomed defiantly. I bent down, touched the petals, and thought about the jet, the air, the roar. I remembered how small I must have looked falling through the sky, and how wide the world had been around me. That memory no longer terrified me. It strengthened me. People soon asked me why I had chosen to confront my father so publicly. Why hadn't I gone straight to the police? Why risk humiliation? The answer came easily, because my mother had taught me that truth looks best in daylight. Secrets whispered in shadows grow strong, but exposed in the open, they shrivel. I wanted the world to see his face when I stood alive before him. That moment was worth every risk. In the days that followed, I wrote a letter to the entire team at Monroe Atlas. It was short, plain, written in my own hand. We build things that last. We pay our debts. We keep our promises. Olivia sent copies to every office across the country. By the end of the week, my inbox was full of replies. Some employees sent notes of gratitude, others sent $10 donations to add to the grant fund, and a few even shared that friends in Europe had contributed 20 pounds in solidarity. I saved every message, tucking them into a digital folder labeled Hope. The press was relentless. Headlines shouted about betrayal, greed, and survival. Photographers camped outside the Beacon Hill house, waiting for a glimpse of me. For a while, I hid behind drawn curtains, but eventually I realized I couldn't live in fear. I stepped outside one morning, coffee in hand, and walked down the street. People stared, some whispered, some even clapped softly. I didn't return their stares. I didn't need to. I walked on, head high, feeling the weight lift with every step. And what of my father? He remained in custody, awaiting trial. The charges were serious: attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Olivia assured me the evidence was strong and that justice would come in time. But I did not let hate consume me. Hate, I realized, is like a hole in the floor. Once it starts, it spreads until everything collapses. I had no desire to fall into that darkness. I did not forgive him, but I refused to let him own my heart any longer. Instead, I focused on the house, the company, and the future. I kept the quiet room where my mother used to read exactly as it was. Her armchair by the window, the shelves filled with novels she loved, the soft rug where I had once fallen asleep as a child. Sometimes I sit there with a book, the window open, the wind brushing the curtains. And every time the breeze touches my face, I remember that same wind holding me as I fell, saving me from the fate he planned. The wind that tried to take me now lives in my lungs. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, Monroe Atlas stabilized. The staff began to believe again. The board accepted me not as a temporary shadow, but as a leader in my own right. Nora became my closest advisor, Olivia my unshakable counsel. Together, we turned survival into renewal. One morning, as I passed the mirror by the front door, I caught my own reflection, tired but strong, marked by scars no one could see. I stopped, looked myself in the eye, and whispered aloud, "Grace, you are here." It became my ritual. Every day, before stepping out into the world, I reminded myself that I had survived the fall, survived the betrayal, and built something new from the ruins. I no longer live in fear of my father's shadow. I live in the light of my mother's promise, in the strength of my own survival, and in the hope of every person who wrote to me, who believed in me, who sent dollars or pounds to the grant fund with nothing more than faith in my name. And so I walk through America with my head high, not as a victim, not as a pawn, but as a woman who has faced death, faced lies, faced silence, and chosen instead to build, to speak, and to keep her promise.